In this video, I'm going to show you how to install and set up the template. When you first download the template, you're going to get an Ableton Live pack like this. You're going to want to open that in Live, and Ableton is going to ask you where you want to install it. In this case, I'm going to put it in the same folder. Once Ableton has installed the pack, you're going to want to navigate to wherever you installed it and open the project file. Now, there are no fancy scripts, there's no custom MIDI mapping. This whole thing is designed to work out of the box with Push's default behavior. We are going to have to set some preferences in Ableton once this template is loaded. Once the template has loaded, you're going to want to go into Ableton's preferences and adjust a few basic settings. So we hit Command, comma to open the preferences. We'll go through these in order. Firstly, in the Look and Feel tab, I usually increase the zoom of the display for a live show. Now, obviously, I wouldn't want to do this in the studio because I need as much screen real estate as possible. But when you're performing live, you're often a couple of meters away from your laptop, and the bigger things are, the easier it is to read. So I would play around with the zoom function and see how far you can zoom the interface in and still be able to see everything. The next big change I typically make is change from the default theme, like this, to the disco theme. Now, I don't like the disco theme particularly in the studio, but when you use the default theme in a club or in a venue at night, there are a couple of problems. The first is that your screen goes gray and actually gives off a lot of light when you use the default theme. Now this, especially if you're DJing and your laptop is closer to you, shines a really unhealthy looking glow on your face. It's very unattractive. It's not something you want to be doing if it's the primary light source on you. The second issue with the default theme is that it screws with your night vision. Because every time you look at your computer screen, your pupils are going to contract because of the brightness. And then whenever you look away from your computer screen, your pupils are going to have to expand again. If you put Ableton in the disco mode and turn down your screen brightness, when you look at your screen, your eyes don't have to adjust, and so it keeps your night vision intact. Next up, we're going to look at some settings and record, warp, and launch. The most important ones here are disabling exclusive arm and exclusive solo. What exclusive arm and solo do is that when one channel is armed and you arm another one, it will de-arm the first channel. Same with solos. Now that's, again, very useful in the studio, but live, there are a few channels inside this template that need to be armed the whole time. And it's very easy to accidentally de-arm them when exclusive arm is turned on. So you want to turn that off so that you can't accidentally turn an arm off by mistake, and do the same thing with solo, because when we switch over to queuing mode, that will make a big difference. Next up, you're going to want to look down here in the launch settings. And the changes you're going to want to make are select on launch to off. What select on launch does is whenever you launch a clip, it will automatically show you that clip. Very useful in the studio, but it means every time you launch something in Ableton, your screen is going to jump around, which is very confusing. You're going to want to leave on select next scene on launch, but you're going to want to turn off start recording on scene launch. The reason you're going to want to turn these off is because as you move through your template launching scenes, there are several tracks in Ableton that are set up to record. Now, if you had that setting on, every time you launched a scene, you would start recording on all those tracks, which would be hugely problematic. So next up, let's talk about sound cards. Now, there are two fundamental ways you can approach this template, and I leave this decision entirely up to you. The first way is internal mixing. To do this, I'm using my Apogee Duet 2 sound card, but there are lots and lots of sound cards with similar features you could buy. Now, the minimum requirement for a sound card to use this template fully is that it will need 2 stereo output channels. You see my Apogee has 2 stereo output channels here. One of these output channels is to go through to a PA system. The other output channel is to go directly to your headphones so that you can have a dedicated mix and monitoring of what you're doing in Ableton. You're also going to want inputs on your sound card. You'll see the Apogee has 2 mono inputs. By default, I would assume you want 1 microphone preamp for the vocal channel, so one channel with a mic preamp, and you're going to want a second channel that ideally has a high Z instrument input or another mic preamp. That will give you access to the guitar channels. So this is a pretty common configuration. A lot of small and medium-sized sound cards will support this function, and this is for internal mixing when you're ideally playing one song after another, doing more of a live set. If you're interested in external mixing, you're going to want a sound card with at least 3 stereo outputs, if not more. I'm a big fan of the Motu Ultralight series, which have a lot of outputs, very reliable, and don't cost all that much money. The reason for this is if you're doing external mixing, you're going to want to route different parts of Ableton out through different channels on your sound card to different channels on your external mixer. For example, the Decks channel, you might want to route directly to external out 1, 2, and then the next deck, core B, you might want to route directly out to 3, 4, and then you might choose to route your parts out to 5, 6, and then everything else in your template out to 7, 8. So that would be for a 4-channel mixer. I think if you're doing external mixing, you're going to want a minimum of 3 channels. One for deck 1, one for deck 2, and one channel for everything else, all the effects, all the instruments, all that good stuff. Now, I imagine most of you already know about latency, but when you're performing live, there are a few settings you're going to want to set that will reduce or minimize latency. The first is, in your preferences, you're going to want to take a look at your buffer size. Now, the lower the buffer size, the lower the latency inside Ableton. You can see we have input and output latency. As a rule of thumb, you don't want your latency to creep up over 20 milliseconds, but lower is always better, up to a point. Now, depending on the speed of your computer and the quality of your sound card, you're going to be able to lower this value down to 128 or even down to 64 or 32. The best way of figuring that out is literally just to set it as low as you can and then play the template for a while and listen to see if you hear any pops or cracks or glitching. If you start getting glitching, turn it up one setting, play for a while until you find the lowest setting with the lowest latency that doesn't cause problems with the computer. Related to latency, there are a couple of settings you're going to want here, which are controlled by options. The first is you're going to want to turn on delay compensation, which is turned on by default. What this does is keeps all the tracks in sync, even if one has a small delay caused by an effect. You're also going to want to turn on reduced latency when monitoring. And what that does is bypasses the delay compensation on any track that is monitoring directly, such as the guitar track, the melody track, or the vocal tracks. That minimizes the latency on any channel inside Ableton that is configured to play an instrument in some capacity. Next up, we're going to look at the input options. Now, my sound card is set to have the guitar input on channel 1 and the microphone input on channel 2. So, if you look in the input-output tab, the guitar needs to pull from channel 1. This is actually connected to a microphone just for this video, but it is normally where the guitar lives. And every single one of these channels here inside the vocal group needs to be external input 2. Now the exact settings will depend on your sound card, so this is something you're going to have to read your sound card manual to sort out. Lastly, let's talk about the reset button. Now the reset button is a key mapping that I've set up that resets all the effects so that when you load the template for the first time or between sets, you can reset all your effects. Now the reset button is controlled by the key R on your keyboard. That's R here. And it will set everything back to the default value. For example, if we're on this channel here and we've played with these effects here and they're all in crazy places and we don't want to spend time resetting them, we can just hit R and they all get set back to their default positions. That's a button I hit pretty much every time I open the template. Lastly, let's take a look at our output options. Now, as I said, if you're doing external mixing, you're going to want to do a little bit of research because it's going to depend on your sound card and your hardware, and so some Googling and some manual reading is going to be required. If you're doing the template the way I do it, it's going to be very simple. You're almost certainly going to want your master output to go to channel 1, 2 on your sound card, and typically your Q output is going to want to go to channel 3, 4, which is the second channel. On my Apogee Duet, 1 and 2 is the main output, and 3 and 4 is the headphone output. So that's it for setup. Check out the rest of the videos to see how this template actually works.